Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. A poor little black boy tells a paralyzed millionaire, "I'll fix you with your leftovers," she laughs. But then everything changes. In a rundown neighborhood of West Baltimore, where the sidewalks were cracked like broken memories and the streetlights flickered at nightfall, lived Elijah Carter, a little black boy of 9 years old, with eyes as bright as a spark in the darkness. He was recognizable from afar by his frizzy, gravity-defying hair, his always too large t-shirt, and above all by the constant curiosity that lit up his eyes. He had no video games, no internet, and no library nearby. But he had the mind of an inventor and the heart of a philosopher. He lived in an old wooden house, crumbling on the outside but full of human warmth on the inside. This house was Miss Hattie, his grandmother, a respected former nurse, now confined to a rocking chair by arthritis and years of hard work. The house's roof leaked with every rain, forcing Elijah to place pots and pans under the weeping gutters. The walls were peeling, the windows creaked, but the house still smelled sweet of black soap, cornbread, and the mint tea Miss Hattie made every night while humming old gospel songs. Despite the poverty that surrounded them, Elijah was never sad. He had learned to find beauty in the damaged, value in what others threw away. Every evening after school, or on days when he couldn't go because he didn't have proper shoes, he would go on an expedition through the streets, his holy plastic bag in hand. He rummaged through the dumpsters in wealthier neighborhoods, those of trendy coffee shops, or brothels as cold as shop windows. He brought back food scraps that he washed carefully, torn books that he glued back together page by page, broken devices that he tried to revive with the help of an old rusty screwdriver. He also collected screws, bits of cable, springs, abandoned phone batteries, a real treasure for him. For Elijah, everything had a second life. Nothing was truly lost as long as there was someone who believed in what it could become. Miss Hattie, for her part, watched him from her chair, her hands knotted with rheumatism but her heart swollen with tenderness. She often said to him, seeing him place an electric circuit next to a piece of dry bread, "People waste what they don't understand. But you, my boy, can turn crumbs into miracles." One day, far from the cracked sidewalks of West Baltimore, in the pristine heights of the neighborhood of Mount Washington, where the gates are gilded, the hedges trimmed to the millimeter, and the sidewalks swept by uniformed gardeners, lived Madison Kingsley. Her name alone made NASDAQ veterans shudder. Former CEO and founder of Ksoft Dynamics, a medical software giant, she had built an empire with a mix of technological genius and strategic coolness. She was the kind of woman journalists called visionary or ruthless, depending on the tone of the article. In the corridors of Wall Street, it was said that she could sniff out a flaw in a market like a vulture detects death. But she no longer possessed this power. One winter night 2 years earlier, a too-quick turn on the icy Appalachian Road put an end to his physical omnipotence. The shock was brutal and definitive, her spine broken, she lost all mobility from the waist down. From then on, nothing was the same again. And yet, Madison Kingsley hadn't lost everything. She had kept her homes, her stocks, her investment portfolio, but his inner fire had gone out. It wasn't paralysis that broke her, it was what she could no longer control, her image, her trajectory, the way others looked at her. Her immense mansion perched on a hill like a fortress of solitude. Behind the tinted windows, she viewed the world as a hazy memory. The rooms, all decorated in a chilling modern style, marble, steel, clean lines, reflected exactly what she had become, perfectly untouchable, but empty. She had dismissed her friends in the first weeks after the accident, unable to bear their ill-disguised pity or hypocritical encouragement. Her family? She had long since lost one. A succession of quarrels, lawsuits, and disputed inheritances had transformed blood ties into legal lines. All he had left was discreet employees, well paid to smile at fixed hours, nurses with blank stares, drivers who waited silently at the wheel, and assistants who answered, "Yes, ma'am," to everything, without ever asking questions. She spent her days in her luxurious armchair, staring into space. No books, no music, no television. Only the drone of security cameras, the blue glow of her screens, and sometimes the distant click of a gardener trimming an already perfect bush. The world had feared her. Today, it forgot her. And in this heavy silence, Madison Kingsley withered, slowly but surely. She rarely went out, and never without an escort. And when she did, it was only to maintain some semblance of power over reality, to show others that she was still there, even if she no longer walked. But no one dared to tell him that his chair was no longer a throne, but a cage. One autumn morning, under a sky of hesitant gray, Madison Kingsley agreed, almost reluctantly, to make one of her rare outings. She had asked her assistant to drive her to the Greenridge Park, an elegant space reserved for Baltimore's wealthiest residents. The place, though sumptuous, always seemed too vibrant, too colorful. But on this day, thanks to a cool wind and dead leaves dancing on the white gravel paths, the park was empty like an abandoned setting. Her state-of-the-art electric wheelchair, equipped with GPS, smart sensors, and safety features worthy of a military vehicle, rolled silently down the main driveway. At her side, her assistant had been ordered to stay away. Madison liked having at least the illusion of solitude. But no sooner had she reached an area near the old vacant lot, a corner even the rich avoided, than the chair abruptly stopped. A strange clicking sound, followed by a mechanical whine. The control screen went dark, short circuit. General failure. Madison pressed the touch panel several times. Nothing. She tried to turn around manually. Impossible. The chair was too heavy, even for her weakened arms. She stood there frozen. Around her, nothing but silence and the rustling of dead leaves. The park was deserted. No joggers, no dog walkers, not even a curious squirrel. His assistant, who had remained at the entrance, hadn't noticed his disappearance. She opened her mouth to call out. "Hey!" His voice was lost in the wind. It is at this precise moment that someone observed him, from the bushes bordering the chic cafe adjacent to the park. Elijah, kneeling behind the trash cans, was carefully removing an old, half-broken toaster. He was about to leave when he saw this tall, motionless woman in a frozen armchair, near the high wrought iron gates. He approached quietly, worried but intrigued. He knew this neighborhood, the police were called for less than that. Yet, he felt he had to go to her. "Madam, are you stuck?" Her voice, soft but assured, pierced the silence like a rope stretched between two worlds. Madison slowly looked up, annoyed, then surprised. A small, thin, black boy covered in dust, his clothes too big for him, his shoes mismatched. He held a plastic bag deformed by all sorts of incongruous objects that he seemed to come from another universe. She looked at him with a dry, almost mechanical gaze. "You can't do anything for me, kid." He could have left. He could have been afraid. But it stays there, solid, anchored, as if his presence were a response to a silent call. Without saying a word, Elijah knelt down by the chair. He touched the electrical panel, examining the cables like a surgeon examining a beating heart. His fingers, stained with rust and dust, caressed the connections with a strange tenderness. Then, methodically, he opened his bag. He came out. An old, half-melted phone charger cable. 2 pieces of twisted metal. A small, rusty scooter battery that is still warm to the touch. And a screwdriver whose handle had been glued back to the wire. He murmured, without looking up. "I can try. I treat with what others throw away." Madison burst out laughing, a dry, haughty, almost nervous laugh. "You want to repair a $35,000 chair, with junk?" But Elijah didn't answer. He was already absorbed. His furrowed brows, his quick, precise movements gave the impression that he'd been doing this all his life. His fingers danced. He connected, cut, and resoldered with wire heated by the flame of a worn lighter. He placed his tools on his knees and picked them up again like a pianist changing chords. Madison watched him, stunned despite herself. The child was in no hurry. He wasn't insolent. He was simply confident, as if he truly believed that what he had in his hands, the crumbs of the world, was worth something. For a long minute, no words were exchanged. In less than 10 minutes, 10 long minutes filled with precise gestures, suspended silence, and burning concentration. A slight click sounds. Almost imperceptible. Like the sound of a padlock opening. Then, a dull beat, a discreet vibration under the wheels. The chair vibrated gently, hesitated, then began to move. Slowly moving, as if he were coming back to life after a long lethargy. Madison, expecting a short-circuit smoke or some other humiliating failure, felt her breath catch. She looked at the control screen. A warning light was flashing faintly, but it was blinking. She pressed the joystick. The chair obeyed. It worked. For a second the world stopped. Neither the wind, nor the leaves, nor the weather dared to move. She turned slowly to Elijah, still crouching beside her, his hands covered in grease and his eyes sparkling with a disarming calm. He wasn't waiting for applause or thanks. He was simply observing his work like an artist who knows he's repaired something deeper than a mechanism. Madison opened her mouth, but the words were like stones in the back of her throat. Finally, she stammered, her eyes wide. You made this with leftovers?" Elijah shrugged, as if what he had just done was not extraordinary, but simply necessary. Then he said, with a frank smile, a smile that lit up everything around him. "It's what rich people leave behind. But for us, it's all we have. So, we learn to use it." Madison isn't laughing this time. His dry, cynical laugh, which usually covered any real emotion, died in a heavy silence. She looked down. She saw his perfectly manicured hands resting on the armrests of his carbon fiber chair, and suddenly felt a strange coldness. An emptiness. A fragility she had never allowed herself to feel. A child had just reminded her of what she had forgotten, the essential. She had spent her life designing technologies, automating medicine, generating profit. She had built artificial intelligence to predict diseases, and now a little boy, with pieces of scrap, had just offered him the most human of gestures, free help, without contract, without strategy, without gain. She felt a shiver run up her spine, a cruel irony, for someone who no longer felt it. And something moved inside her, slowly. Like an old creaking door. It wasn't pity. It wasn't gratitude. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. Admiration, pure, raw, almost painful, and of shame. From the shame of having believed that only those who possessed deserved. Shame for laughing. Shame of having forgotten the dignity of the invisible. The next morning, Madison Kingsley did what she had never done in 20 years of living in the Golden Heights of Baltimore. She asked her personal assistant to take him down, in the neighborhoods that his people only mentioned half-heartedly, those that were spoken of as if they were talking about a foreign world, with contempt, or with fear. West Baltimore. As the car wound down the avenues, the buildings getting older, the windows dirtier, the sidewalks narrower, an unusual silence settled over the cabin. Madison didn't speak. She watched. She observed the graffitied walls, the children without helmets on rusty bikes, the tired mothers at bus stops. It wasn't chaos she saw. It was bare life. And she wondered why she had never seen her like this before. Arriving at a small street with dilapidated houses, the assistant stopped. He was visibly uncomfortable. "Are you sure, Mrs. Kingsley? You don't want me to come with you?" She shook her head gently. "No. I have to go alone." Miss Hattie's house was the only one on the block with living flowerpots still on the windowsills, though cracked. The paint was peeling, the porch creaked, but there was a smell of laundry, warm bread, courage. Madison knocked. After a few seconds, it is Elijah himself who opened it. He was wearing an oversized sweatshirt with the sleeves rolled up. He was holding a screwdriver in one hand and an old, dismantled radio in the other. He looked up. His gaze remained fixed for a moment. He hadn't expected to see her again. Even less here. But he said nothing. He stepped back, to let her in. Madison rolled slowly into the living room. Miss Hattie watched her with a gaze that was both gentle and piercing, as if she were silently reading her heart. Elijah put down his tools, wiped his hands on his pants, then stood in front of her, curious but not arrogant. She looked at him for a long time, then declared, without emphasis, without staging. "You fixed more than my chair." A silence. "You reminded me of what I had forgotten, the essential." Elijah raised his eyebrows slightly, not really understanding. But Miss Hattie understood. She smiled wryly, as if she had always known that one day, the world would come knocking at his door. A few weeks later, an announcement appeared in major newspapers, local channels, and social networks. Because talent doesn't belong to any social class. Because geniuses sometimes sleep under leaky roofs. Madison Kingsley, until then invisible to the world since his accident, was making a comeback, but not in tech. She was throwing Onique Foundation, an initiative aimed at identify, support and train inventive children from disadvantaged backgrounds, engineering, electronics, robotics, eco-design. We offered internships, mentors, mobile laboratories in forgotten schools. The first scholarships were offered to young people from Baltimore, Detroit, Newark, and Atlanta. The first name listed on the foundation's website was that of a little boy. Elijah Carter, ingenuity, dignity, courage. He was invited onto several TV shows, but he refused the cameras, preferring to work on his projects in the garage he had converted into a workshop. When asked what he thought about all this, he simply replied, "I just did what I could, with what I was left with." But in schools, neighborhoods, homes, we no longer looked at leftovers as before. 3 years later, a gentle breeze swept across the perfectly manicured lawns of the White House. It was a solemn summer day, bathed in clear skies and a golden light that made the flags brighter and eyes brighter. In the South Gardens, under a large white tent erected for the occasion, the biggest names in technology, education, and politics were gathered for the Young Innovators of the Year ceremony. Dozens of cameras were filming, journalists were taking notes, advisors were whispering in the ears of senators. At the center of attention that day, Elijah Carter, 16 years old, stood on the stage, a little stiff in a suit that was too big for him, obviously borrowed for the occasion. The tie hung a little askew, but no one noticed. Because his gaze, had not changed. He carried the same bright light, the same silent determination, the same ability to stare fearlessly into the horizon. His name had resonated throughout the country in recent years. He had designed a low-cost water purifier made from recycled materials. He had helped modernize the electrical equipment of a local school using entirely items found in dumps. He was even invited by NASA engineers to collaborate on a prototype emergency repair tool for astronauts, designed from electronic waste. But that day, he didn't talk about his inventions. Right in front of the stage, in the front row, stood Madison Kingsley, sitting in her armchair, elegant, dignified. Her short white hair gave her an air of serenity. She no longer ruled an empire, but she had become essential moral figurine educational philanthropy circles. The Elijah Project was now present in 28 American cities, and more than 5,000 young people benefited from it each year. When it was her turn to speak, she slowly approached the lectern, and silence fell. His voice was calm, clear, without embellishment. 3 years ago, I met a little boy covered in dust who reached out to me without asking. He didn't know who I was or what I owned. He didn't see a paralyzed woman. He saw a broken machine. And he decided to fix it. She turned to Elijah, her eyes shining. This boy gave me what my money never could, a meaning to my life. A heartfelt applause erupted in the tent. But Elijah wasn't smiling. He simply bowed his head gently, humble. Then it was his turn. He approached the microphone, tugged lightly at the sleeves of his oversized jacket, and took a deep breath. His voice, calm but assured, carried effortlessly. When I was little, people told me I lived in a forgotten neighborhood. That I had nothing. But that's not true. I had hands. I had a mind. And I had a grandmother who taught me this. The crumbs of others are the seeds of your future. He paused. I was taught to make do with crumbs. But now I want to learn how to build feasts. For all those who, like me, had only leftovers. I want no child to feel useless. I want no invention to remain buried in the dirty streets of our cities. And in a shocking silence, he concluded. The future does not belong to those who already have everything. It belongs to those who dare to create something, with almost nothing. The fowl is raised. Tears, clasped hands, upset looks. And among them, Madison, looking at this young boy, her savior, her teacher, and now, the guide of an entire generation.